This revolution is not going away.
This is the Ron Paul Liberty Report with Ron Paul, Daniel McAdams, and Chris Rossini.
We are all ambassadors of the Ron Paul doctrine, and it's so simple. Just tell the truth.
An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army or any government.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With us today, Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this Monday morning?
It's Monday already?
It is, yes, that's right.
I am doing fine, and we have still a couple problems left in the world, but maybe at the end of the day we'll have some. No, that's too silly of a joke.
Too optimistic.
No, war has been around a long time. It's going to be around a long time, but we still have to deal with it because the opposite of not dealing with it and permitting as many people as possible to live in peace, then we would be failing. Because I think the majority of the people of the world would rather live with peace rather than war. And yet, the propaganda and the control, the money, and the people who love militarism, they seem to dominate the control of the policies. And it's not always just politicians. It's usually includes a lot of people who make a lot of money, in this business. So right now, Israel, we've worked with Israel for a long time, and we do what they ask us to do, and we try to get along with them. But now they want more. They keep wanting more and more. And one headline here coming from Moon of Alabama, Israel asked, and I put that in quote, that's my quote, ask for a guarantee share of U.S. weapon purchases. Well, I thought they got all of it. We know they get a guarantee of $3 billion a year,
3.5,
and but they don't get the money directly. That money probably just gets sent to the checking accounts of the people who get the weapons.
Yeah.
But they want to make this more democratic and more open. So they want a better share of it, and they want to spread the profits around. So this is not especially good news if you're anti-war and pro-peace, because this just adds fuel to the fire, even if a lot of people like it. But I think, though, less and less people now are liking what's going on with the relationships with Israel, and it's something that has existed. But there was a time when the American people bought into the propaganda. If you said such a thing, if you had any criticism at all about the political activity of Israel in this country, other countries, they might get arrested. But they as long as they've done that, it's people put up with it, and they were intimidated. But things are changing now, and I think this is part of that change, and it's going to get worse because Trump's 3-day war, 3-week war, it's not going to work out. But he reminded us he's an honest person. He's honest, at least he's talking with his level of honesty. But he said he never said that he would never start a war. It's something along those lines, and he was going to stop. And everybody remembers that statement. But it was hyperbole, and the people understand that. But it was also an attitude that the people wanted to hear. And there's still a lot of people who believe this. They get convinced that the enemy of the world has nothing to do with the foreign policy of the United States, and that's what we have to admit.
Yeah. Well, Israel has become increasingly militaristic, militant. It's at war literally with all of its neighbors. It's on a land grab throughout the region. Anyone who doubts that, just look on the patches of IDF soldiers. It shows Greater Israel, which would include big parts of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and neighboring countries. So they clearly have territorial ambitions, but they also have a problem because they're a small country, although, as you point out, technologically advanced, but they are a small country with limited military and financial resources. So the answer has been and continues to be Well, we just simply get the U.S. to do our fighting for us. They give us the weapons, they give us the support, they refuel our planes, our jets, our bombers, and then we can continue conquering territory. But the problem is, and actually Netanyahu has said this, he said we have a 7-front war, but the 8th front that we're opening is for the American mind, his American people, the battle for their opinion. Well, it's not going well on that front, and I don't think it's going well on any other fronts, to be quite honest with you, because poll after poll that we've discussed on the show shows the American public, particularly the younger generation, pulling more and more away from Israel. This is something that really the older generation, the Fox News watching generation, still maintains this, but for younger generations, it's gone. So how do you solve this problem? Because eventually the people are going to speak up. They're going to be able to eloquently tell their representatives, we are tired of this. If you want to keep your job, we need to stop these entangling alliances. And if that's the case, then Israel faces some big problems because it can't keep starting wars if it doesn't have the resources. So what do? Magic. You get rid of this requirement to get a yearly stipend from the U.S., and you simply integrate the two militaries together. Now, we talked about this, I think it was last Monday, and since then there's been an absolute firestorm of information and things. We'll go through a few of them here, but that's essentially what's happening.
You know, things aren't getting better if they go ahead and pass this proposal that this money is spent in Israel. In the future, if this idea prevails, in the future, the Pentagon, according to this article, the Pentagon will have to spend, by law, a part of its budget on purchases from Israel. Given the $1.5 trillion war budget proposed by Trump, the profits from such an alliance for Israel will be a multiple of its current stipend. So it just doesn't make any sense as the bankruptcy is evolving, and it's much more serious than they admit to. The propaganda, they can handle it pretty well, except they're not fooling the majority of the American people. They can do that for a while, but no, they're going to continue to do this and spend the money. But this means there's just more gravy off the top of our military-industrial complex and giving it to the military-industrial complex of Israel, and that's to make everybody happy. But you know, the only one thing you don't have to worry about is it wasn't providing any national defense for us anyway. The money is usually aggravating our national defense, yeah. And so I wish they could see that in a more orderly, intellectual way, though.
Yeah. Well, here's what our friend Bernard over at Moon of Alabama put up over the weekend. If we can go to that first clip. Israel asked for a guaranteed share of U.S. weapon purchases, as you mentioned, Dr. Paul. The colonial expansion of Israel is openly subsidized by the U.S., with currently $3.5 billion per year. Much of that money is bound to Israel's purchase of U.S.-made weapons. The stipend is controlled by Congress and must pass the yearly budget review. The Israeli government is trying to change the stipend into a more lucrative racket. It has suggested to replace the yearly subsidy by, quote, deeper military cooperation, which is code for the guaranteed U.S. purchase of Israeli-made weapons and continuous profits for Israeli weapon manufacturers. To institute the new scheme, Congress will pass a law that will integrate Israel's military-industrial complex into U.S. procurement and production lines. And I highlight this part because it's the most important. Following that, there will be no more yearly reviews. So that means Congress they write themselves out of the play. We're done. Your money's guaranteed. Everything you want is guaranteed. We don't have to even think about it anymore.
You know, I've expressed myself many times about one of my biggest concerns has been the popularity in the movement toward corporatism. It's been around for a long time, but it's getting very serious. And of course, the history of corporatism shows that it many times, and according to the predictions of Mises, he says corporatism leads to authoritarianism under a system more like fascism. So you hear a lot of people being accused of being a fascist, and they throw the word around. But it's corporatism which is the starting of the understanding about what fascism is all about. So this is something that means that these business people are going to get financed. The business people it's an international partnership. It's bad enough that we take care of we subsidize our own military industrial complex in many ways. I mean, corporatism doesn't involve just military. It's a big one, but there's a lot of it now that goes on. The corporations are very powerful, and they're really the lifeblood of the deep state. You can't pick out 10 corporate leaders and say, oh, no, they'd run the whole show. But the whole principle of the corporations being able to, materialize and promote their ideas to the Congress. And, of course, this one gets a little bit more confusing because a lot of corporatism doesn't involve military weaponry. There's other thing that goes on, too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, just even the medical system. There's corporations getting involved and changing the whole system of medicine. So this is something that I think has made a major step toward internationalizing this principle. And it was merely to change the tune, change the wording of this. And they changed the way they do it. But do you think they're going to be satisfied with their share? They'll be immediately, because they all have to have a cost of living. They'll probably have it marked in the bill. Cost of living increases. 10% inflation last year. Yeah. Well, we better provide for that because we don't have to go through this every year. But this will be just a further firing up this whole effort of the corporatism that is very dangerous to our personal liberties.
And, the problem with this, there are problems on multiple levels, obviously. Just foreign aid itself, no matter which country it goes to, the idea of integrating our military, our own national defense, with another country, that's a huge problem. Americans, they either pay directly or they pay through the inflation tax for this massive military. And the third is the assumption, which it must be unprecedented in history, the assumption that any foreign country, but in this case Israel's foreign national security interests and priorities are identical to ours. And that is an absolutely fallacious idea. The idea that we have identical, because obviously geographically they are more interested in the Middle East because that's where they live. We happen to be less interested, or should be less interested, in the Middle East because we don't live there. So this is problematic on a number of fronts. Now go to that second one. This is still Bernard over at Moon of Alabama. He's quoting MSM. If enacted, the provision could mark a major change in one of the world's closest military relationships. Now I highlight this, shifting the two countries from a partnership centered largely on American military aid towards one in which their defense industries are more deeply intertwined. Section 224 would require the U.S. Defense Secretary to appoint an, quote, executive agent, a single official to coordinate military cooperation between the U.S. and Israel. And I've read somewhere that executive agent may actually be an Israeli citizen. In the future, the Pentagon, this is back to Bernard, in the future, the Pentagon will have to spend, by law, a part of its budget on purchases from Israel. Given that the $1.5 trillion war budget proposed by Trump, the profits for such an alliance for Israel will be a multiple of its current stipend. Congress is currently in the process of passing. So I flubbed that up a little bit. It's a little difficult for me to see the screen. But essentially what they're saying is that the however many billion dollars we give Israel now will be doubled, tripled, however many now under this new arrangement. So Israel will end up not only integrated with our systems, but also taking far, far more money out of our treasury.
When they passed the bill, I think it was under Carter, where he had a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. And that was, the guarantee, in a way, I thought this is insane. This will break down. Something's going to happen. But, from their point of view, it worked pretty darn well.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of money. It's almost in silence. No, they probably don't debate it every year. But now when the things are getting much tighter, both in the foreign policy successes and our military, and even the protection of our own secrets that we're supposed to, for national security. It is a step in a wrong direction, and it to me is tragic. It's not going to save one nickel, and you already pointed out the cost is going to go up, not down, on this, and we're going to be less secure. And yet there is an awakening, and that's what I find very interesting. This whole issue has split the Democratic Party. It hasn't split the Republican Party. They have some good guys like Thomas pointing out these problems, but no, there are more Democrats. But sometimes that it used to be on principle. When we work with some progressives, I always thought and respected them on principle. But now it's all politics. Yeah. It's all who's going to have the gavel. Yeah. Because they're the ones who, guideline where this money goes. And that's why we deserve to run out of that money and let the people keep their money. What a simple proposal, and what a success it would be. Yeah, you don't have to destroy one thing. What you do is you just leave the money where it's supposed to be. Yeah. Let the people be making these decisions. But we're not on the verge of that. But we do know there are millions of people who know and understand that issue. So what we need to do is keep those proposals alive.
Absolutely. Well, one of our new friends, or at least we recently met him in person, spoke at our conference, Joe Kent. He came out with a piece in his Responsible Statecraft. If you put that next one up, and he makes, as often or as always we've seen, Dr. Paul, he makes the right argument. He says U.S.-Israel integration is far from America first. We go to the next one. The war against Iran may have resulted in some tactical victories for Israel and the United States in the battlefield, but Israel is not winning American public opinion, and neither are those American leaders who ardently support it. An excellent sentence captures everything. That's the problem, according to the people who are ardent supporters of Israel. The dwindling popularity could put in jeopardy the $3.8 billion that Israel receives in U.S. military aid each year. And that's not all we provide Israel. We also offer invaluable diplomatic cover on the world stage, in addition to direct U.S. military support during specific crises. Now, this is important because this is why the $3.8 billion is really not even the tip of the iceberg. Here's what Joe Kent writes, separately, the war in Iran has mostly benefited Israel's regional agenda and has cost the U.S. taxpayer more than an estimated $50 billion so far. Because of these factors, most Americans are growing wary of the support. Now go to that next one. So there's a problem, according to the ardent pro-Israel people. But to get ahead of those sentiments, Israel and its American allies, like U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee, are attempting to rebrand the aid we give to Israel each year. Rather than the annual memorandum of understanding outlays, anything we give Israel would be, quote, based on trade. You mentioned this earlier, Dr. Paul, according to Huckabee. Now, this is very clever, and it's sort of clever and sort of evil. The goal of this shift is to undermine the notion that Israel is dependent on American handouts and that the U.S. taxpayer is footing the bill for horrific scenes coming out of Gaza and Lebanon. So that's essentially what it is. Go to the next one. Section 224, literally endorsed by Netanyahu, will transform Israel from a top U.S. aid recipient to a full member of the U.S. defense and intelligence apparatus. Another powerful sentence here. When it comes to counterintelligence and strategic messaging, the Section 224 initiative is far more damaging to U.S. national security than the previous arrangement. Read that one yourselves over again. By embedding Israel in the production of critical defense technologies, we are creating access and control mechanisms for a nation that has drastically different goals than America does. Now, you don't have to be pro or con Israel, Dr. Paul, I think, to look at that last sentence and realize why there's a problem. They have drastically different goals, just like Belgium has different goals than we would have, just like Korea has different goals than we would have. It's called being a nation, being sovereign. So the idea that we share these goals is just absurd, I think.
The management of international trade, we've learned a little bit about this, and it's been emphasized in the current administration, and that is the use of tariffs and sanctions, using that to guide things and direct things because they know what is best. This is almost the opposite.
Yeah.
We're with the tariffs and sanctions, we threaten the individuals. You can't do this, you can't do that, and we end up with, the destruction of the transportation of a little product like oil. And we end up with the main complaint is, why is my gasoline bill so high?
Yeah.
But this to me is the opposite. It's forcing and guiding it the trade that is not a normal trade. It's a political, trade, buying and selling, and who gets this money? You steal it from the people, you inflate the money, you give them the inflation, and then you go in and force them to buy the weapons from somebody who somebody claims spies on us. And that to me is, I still marvel at the apparent superficial success of all this nonsense. It just shows how vibrant, even a little bit of freedom and sound policy can last. And it's lasted for a long time. But that doesn't mean we've been complacent. Our country's been complacent because, over the last century or so, we've avoided getting into the worst kind of wars, even though we get into kind of wars that are draining us. Each one gets worse, and we get drained from it, and it's continuing. So this is working its way to a climactic end, and that's what we need to prepare the people for.
No, that's a great point, because Americans do not want more wars, but Israel obviously does. They keep starting new wars. They want more wars. Hey, that's fine. It's up to you, though. You're on your own. I mean, if this merging of our two militaries and intelligence apparatuses goes through, what would the average American think? Would there not be more incentive for Israel to start more wars because they've got Big Brother behind them with all the weapons and the money? They will not have any incentive to make peace with their neighbors. On the contrary, and so we're going to get sucked into multiple new wars if this is what happens.
Well, there's a little bit of blame that we have to admit belongs closer to home, because of that. The people do go along with it. Either they tolerate it. The people who do manage to get by and are complaining now, which is good. I think they're waking up. But in many ways, these wars are usually when they're illegal and that's unconstitutional, are started. It's by presidential orders. Yeah. And just because one is tough talking and one is soft talking, they still do the same thing. Yeah. They still start these skirmishes. End up killing a lot of people. Lately there's been a pretty good evidence that there's been if you compared deaths compared to the amount of bombs that we drop, the deaths of American soldiers much reduced. But I tell you though, this doesn't mean that there's going to be less money and less suffering, and that is what the people are feeling now, and we should capitalize on that and to show them why this happens. There's always a reason, but the big why that I try to answer but I can't answer is, why do the people get along with it all and put it all? But I think it might not be complicated. It might be that they think their interests are best served. I mean, what if they believe in total free market medicine? And I do believe that, but for me, even as a physician, to be able to practice free market medicine, either as a doctor or a patient, makes it very, very difficult. There's roadblocks in there. So that's why we end up with this mess that we have to deal with.
Yeah, you just made another great point a minute ago, Dr. Paul. We can hardly blame Israel for wanting someone else to pick up the tab, right? If you go to lunch with someone and they grab the bill, you might complain a little bit, but in the end, you're kind of happy, thanks. Yeah. So you're right. The blame should come closer to home. The person who's willing to do this on behalf of the rest of us who don't want it done. And you also point out this other thing, and I think it's no coincidence that this next story came out right when we're talking about integrating our military with Israel. Now go to that next one. Kyle Anzalone at antiwar.com, Libertarian Institute, wrote this up. So right when we're talking about meshing our military and intelligence apparatus with Israel, Pentagon, Israel ramps up spying on top U.S. officials. The Department of War has raised the counterintelligence threat posed by Israel to its top level. The sources said Tel Aviv wanted intelligence on Washington's plans for the war against Iran. The New York Times and NBC News report speaking with multiple sources who said the Defense Intelligence Agency raised the threat posed by Israel to the critical level. The Times reports that targets of Israeli intelligence include President Donald Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff. Now, a couple of things on this, Dr. Paul. A, all countries spy on each other. That's just a given. It happens. Israel spies on us. Of course, they want to know what's happening when we're talking to Iran, so they're going to listen in. That's what countries do. However, it goes back to the original point. If a country is considered the most critical threat to our national security by spying on us in these sensitive areas, that by definition means we don't have the exact same interest, and we shouldn't integrate our military with theirs because they show themselves willing and able to exploit our military apparatus for their own benefit.
And once there are people who analyze this and come down with a conclusion that you've just stated, they have the wherewithal and the incentives, and they sort of have to give up. And they said, I have to move, and that to me is so sad because people have asked me that over the years because I sympathize with people getting so frustrated and have suffered, unfairly, from government actions, and so much suffering has occurred, whether it's the wars or the type of economy that punishes the innocent people more than the rich. But there are some rich people right now that I've just had it enough, and we can't trust our government, and that is a sad situation. So I think it's this whole idea, the infiltration of nihilism, where people have given up on the fact that, well, let's talk about the truth. We can all agree that you shouldn't kill people, so why can't we just extend that to say, we should never tell a lie?
Yeah.
But we live in a society now where, fortunately, it's still recognized that if you commit fraud as a single, as a citizen, they still, recognize that's wrong, lying. But when governments lie, and they lie incessantly, what about the lie to go to war?
Yeah.
And it just goes on and on. That's why information, and that is why leaving Congress, I pointed out, one of the things that I want to work hardest on is protecting the First Amendment to the point where we can speak out. And we have already seen some of this come close to home where people are punished, and I can think of a few members of Congress that have been punished for that reason because they actually told the truth on the House floor.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Well, another huge convergence in our interests is Lebanon, because the President Trump has said very, very clearly, we want the war in Lebanon to stop. Israel, you need to stop bombing Lebanon. Israel says, sorry, won't do it. And they don't even say sorry. There's
take the money from them.
Yeah, take the money. So here's now one more from Joe Kent. Let's skip one and go to the one the White House said they're reporting on. If we go to that one, I use skip one and go to the next one. Now this is obvious. The White House said the reporting on the counterintelligence threat from Israel was false. Quote, the entire story is false and sourced to someone who doesn't have any knowledge of what's going on. Israel also claimed the report is completely false. Now, this is the part where we get to laugh out loud, Dr. Paul. The Israeli statement said, quote, Israel does not gather intelligence on American entities, let alone U.S. government officials. In an episode of this last weekend with Theo Vaughn, former CIA counterintelligence officer John Kiriakou said that Israel has always spied on the U.S., to which we would both say, duh, of course, we spy on a lot of countries too. Now, going back to Bernard, we'll, I guess, finish where we started. Apropos this whole idea about Israel spying on us, Go to that next one. Israel is known for selling U.S. secrets to other countries. When Jonathan Pollard pilfered strategic deployment plans of the U.S. nuclear submarines for Israel, the Zionists sold those to the Soviet Union. U.S. F-16 fighter jet technology used to develop Israel's Lavi fighter jet ended up in China after the program was canceled. The Pentagon's question to Congress, camouflaged as a leaked DIA assessment, is this: do you really want to let Israel share and sell off our deepest secrets? AIPAC will pull its strings with members of Congress to get the right answer to that question, says Bernard at Moon of Alabama. So I think he's absolutely right on.
You know, if we're in the business of telling people who can own a nuclear weapon and who shouldn't own it, and if some may be legitimate or not, I would think there would be an easy solution for the Middle East. You know, pick up the 10 of those major countries in the Middle East where they've been fighting over this for years and years. Why don't we just have an agreement? Nobody should own a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, nobody, yeah.
And fat chance of that happening.
Yeah. Well, let's have a little palate cleanser as we close up and put on that very last clip. And because there's so many depressing things we deal with, Dr. Paul, that last clip is happy people picking coffee beans. Beautiful. I wish we could do this after the show, Dr. Paul, but we don't grow coffee here. Anyway, this is our affiliate. Moon does artisan coffee. The Ron Paul Revolution blend is coffee, a coffee blend, custom roasted, USDA organic, and it's brewed according to our taste. So hopefully they're brewed toward our listeners' taste. Go ahead and click that, sign in on that QR code to order some delicious Ron Paul Revolution blend coffee. And I want to thank everyone also for joining us today. Please hit the like button. Please hit the thumbs up. Whatever you can hit on your computer to get our show out, please do it, and we appreciate it.
Very
Over
good.
to you, Dr. Paul.
I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. We are very pleased with your support, and we are working very diligently to live up to our promise that we are going to work for peace and prosperity, because we are convinced it's a much better way to go. And how anybody can endorse and spend a lifetime doing exactly the opposite, it's sort of a mystery to me. But I want to thank you once again, though, for joining us today. Please spread the message of liberty, and please come back to the Liberty Report soon.
Thanks for watching the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Like and subscribe to help spread the message. And until next time, live free.
This country is in a revolution, and